One is called the House of Lords. They are men from the oldest and greatest families in the country. The other is called the House of Commons. These are the most honest, intelligent, and sensible men in the country, and are freely chosen by the people. We have judges to decide punishments for criminals, and we have a large army which cannot be defeated by any other in the world. While I was talking, the king was making notes. For several days I continued my explanation, and I also described British history over the last 100 years. Then the king asked me a large number of questions. These were some of them. How do you teach and train young people of good family? If the last son of an old family dies, how do you make new lords for the House of Lords? Are these lords really the most suitable people to make the country's laws? And in the House of Commons, are these men really so honest and intelligent? Do rich men never buy their way into this house? You say the lawmakers receive no pay, but are you sure that they never accept bribes? Then he asked questions about our law courts. Why are your trials so long and so expensive? How much do your lawyers and judges really know about the laws? How carefully do they decide between right and wrong? And why, he went on, are you so often at war? Either you enjoy fighting, or you have very difficult neighbors. Why do you need an army at all? You would not be afraid of any other country if you were peaceful people. And in the last 100 years, you've done nothing but rob, fight, and murder. Your recent history shows the very worst effects of cruelty, jealousy, dishonesty, and madness. I tried to answer the king as well as I could, but he did not think our system was a good one. No, my little friend, he said kindly but seriously, I'm sorry for you. You've proved to me that your country has nothing valuable to offer us. Perhaps once, in the past, your political life was adequately organized. But now it is clear that there is laziness and selfishness in every part of the system. Your politicians can be bribed, your soldiers aren't really brave, your judges and lawyers are neither reasonable nor honest, and your lawmakers themselves know little and do less. I sincerely hope that you, who have spent most of your life travelling, have a better character than most Englishmen. But from what you've told me, I'm afraid that your countrymen are the worst little nation of insects that has ever crawled upon the ground. I am very sorry to have to report these words of the king's, and I only do so because of my love of the truth. I must tell you exactly what happened, even if I do not agree with it. I had to listen patiently while he was giving his extraordinary opinions of my dear country. We must remember, however, that this king lives in a country almost completely separate from the rest of the world. Because he does not know other countries' systems or customs, he has a certain narrowness of thinking, which we Europeans do not have, of course. You will find it difficult to believe what happened next. Sir, I said, I'd like to give you something to thank you for your kindness to me. since I arrived at the palace. 300 or 400 years ago, we Europeans discovered how to make a special powder. When you set fire to it, it burns and explodes immediately, with a noise louder than thunder. You can use it to shoot heavy balls of metal from large guns. It can destroy the largest ships. It can kill a whole army. It can cut men's bodies in half. It can destroy the strongest walls. It's called gunpowder, and it's easy and cheap to make. To show you how grateful I am to you, I'm offering to explain how to make it. Then you will be able to destroy all your enemies. I was very surprised by the king's reply. "No!" he cried in horror. "Don't tell me. I don't want to know how to murder people like that. I would rather give half my country away than know the secret of this powder. How can a tiny creature like you have such inhuman, cruel ideas? Never speak to me of this again." How strange that such an excellent king should not take the chance I was offering him. No European king would hesitate for a moment. But he had other strange ideas. He believed, very simply, that every problem can be solved by honest, sensible people, and that the political life of a country must have no secrets and must be open for all to see and understand. Of course, we know that this is impossible, so perhaps his opinion of us is not worth considering. Chapter 9. Gulliver escapes from Brobdingnag. I was still hoping to return to England one day, but the ship in which I had arrived in Brobdingnag was the first that had ever come near the coast, so I could not see how I could get away. I began to think more and more about my family and my home. By now, I had been in Brobdingnag for about 2 years. When the king and queen travelled to the south coast, Glumdalclitch and I went with them. I really wanted to be close to the sea again, which I had not seen or even smelt for so long. As Glumdalclitch was ill, I asked a young servant to take me down to the beach for some fresh air. The boy carried me in my travelling box and put me down on the beach while he looked for birds' eggs among the rocks. I looked sadly at the sea, but stayed in my box, and after a while I fell asleep. I was woken suddenly when my box was lifted high in the air. I can only suppose that a large bird took hold of the ring on top of the box with his talons and flew away with it. Through the windows I could see the sky and clouds passing by, and I could hear the noise of the bird's wings. Then I was falling so fast that I felt quite breathless. There was a loud crash as the box fell into the sea. Perhaps the bird had been attacked by others, and so had to drop what he was carrying. Luckily, the box had been well made, and not much seawater came in, but I do not think any traveller has ever been in a worse situation than I was then. I wondered how long I would survive with no food or drink in the middle of the ocean. I felt sure I would never see poor Glumdalclitch again, and I knew how sad she would be to lose me. Several hours passed, and then I suddenly heard a strange noise above my head. People were fastening a rope to the ring. Then my box was pulled through the water. Was it a ship that was pulling me along? "Help! Help!" I shouted as loudly as I could. I was delighted to hear English voices reply. "Who's there?" they cried. "I'm English!" I shouted back desperately. "Please help me to get out of here. Just put your finger into the ring on top of the box and lift it out of the water, quickly." There were great shouts of laughter. "He's mad," I heard one man say. "10 men couldn't lift that huge box," said another. There was more laughter. Indeed, because I had been with giants for so long, I had forgotten that my countrymen were as small as me. The only thing the sailors could do was to cut a hole in the top of my box and help me to climb out. I was exhausted and unable to walk far. They took me to their captain. "Welcome to my ship," he said kindly. "You're lucky we found you. My men saw that huge box on the water, and we decided to pull it along behind the ship. Then we realized there was a man inside. Why were you locked up in there? Was it a punishment for some terrible crime? But tell me all about it later. Now you need to sleep, and then eat." When I told him my story a few hours later, he found it difficult to believe. But after a while, he began to accept that what I told him must be true. "But why do you shout so loudly?" he asked. "We can hear you perfectly well if you speak normally." "You see," I explained, "for 2 years I've had to shout to make myself understood by the giants. I was like a man in the street who was trying to talk to another man at the top of a very tall building. And another thing, your sailors all seem very small to me, because I've been used to looking up at people 20 meters tall." He shook his head. "Well, what a story! I think you should write a book about it when you get home." I stayed on the ship for several months as we sailed slowly home to England. Finally, we arrived in Bristol on June the 3rd, 1706. When I reached home, my wife made me promise never to go to sea again, and I thought my adventures had come to an end. Chapter 10. The Flying Island of Laputa. I had only been at home for about 10 days when a friend of mine asked me to join him on a journey to the East Indies. I still wanted to see more of the world, and as he was offering to give me double the usual pay, I managed to persuade my wife to let me go. The voyage took 8 months, and after stopping for a short time in Malaysia, we arrived in the Gulf of Tonkin. "I'll have to stay here for a while on business," my friend the captain told me. "But you can take the ship and some of the sailors. Go and see what you can buy and sell in the islands around here." That sounded interesting to me, so I agreed. Unfortunately, we sailed straight into a terrible storm, which drove us many miles eastward. Then, by a very unlucky chance, we were seen and chased by 2 pirate ships. Our ship was not fast enough to escape, and the pirates caught us. They decided to keep the sailors to help sail the ship, but they did not need me. I suppose I was lucky they did not kill me. Instead, they left me alone in a small boat in the middle of the ocean, with only enough food for a few days while they sailed away. I'm sure the pirates thought I would die. However, I saw land some hours later, and I managed to sail the boat to it. As I stepped out of the boat and walked up the beach, I noticed that although the sun had been very hot, the air suddenly seemed cooler. At first, I thought a cloud was passing over the sun. But when I looked up, I saw, to my great astonishment, a large island in the sky, between me and the sun. It was moving towards me, and there were people running around on it. I waved my arms and shouted as loudly as possible, "Help! Help!" I cried. "Rescue me!" When the island was about 100 meters over my head, they let down a seat on a chain. I sat on it and was pulled up to the island. I had discovered the flying island of Laputa. Laputans are certainly strange-looking people. Their heads always turn either to right or left. One of their eyes turns inwards, the other upwards. Their main interests are music and mathematics. They spend so much time thinking about mathematical problems that they do not notice what is happening around them. In fact, rich Laputans employ a servant whose job is to follow his master everywhere. The servant warns him if he is going to step into a hole, and reminds him to reply if someone speaks to him. I was taken to see the king, but had to wait for at least an hour while he struggled with a difficult mathematical question. However, when he had finished, he spoke politely to me and ordered his servants to show me to a room. For dinner, they gave me 3 kinds of meat: a square of beef, a triangle of chicken, and a circle of lamb. Even the bread was cut into mathematical shapes. In the evening, a teacher arrived to help me learn the language, and in a few days I was able to make conversation with the island people. Laputa is a circle of land about 8 kilometers across, covered with houses and other buildings. It is moved by a simple machine which uses magnets to pull the island closer to land or push it higher into the sky. The island always moves slowly. It can only fly over the country called Belnibabi, which belongs to the king of Laputa. It is difficult talking to Laputans, as they have little interest in anything except music and mathematics. They are, however, very worried about the future of the earth, the sun, and the stars, and they often discuss this. I heard a conversation about this shortly before I left Laputa. "How are you, my friend?" one man asks another. "As well as can be expected," came the reply. "And how is the sun, do you think?" "I thought he looked rather feverish this morning. I'm afraid he'll get too hot and destroy himself one day, if he goes on like this." "I know, it's very worrying." "And what about the Earth? It's only 30 years until the next falling star comes this way, and the Earth was very nearly destroyed by the last one." "That's right. We know that the next falling star is almost certain to get too close to the sun and catch fire. And when the Earth passes through that fire, it'll be destroyed immediately." "Only 30 years. That's not much to look forward to, is it?" And the two men shook their heads sadly. After several months on the island, I asked if I could visit the country underneath us. The king agreed, and ordered his officials to put me down on Belnibabi and show me round the capital, Legado. The most interesting place I saw there was the university, which was full of very clever men with very clever ideas. They were all working hard to find better, faster, cheaper, easier ways of doing and making things. They had ideas for building houses from the roof downwards, turning rocks into soft material, making rivers run uphill, and saving sunshine in bottles. I cannot remember half of the astonishingly clever ideas which they were working on. One day, they told me, they would find the answers to all these problems, and then their country would be the most wonderful place in the world. Meanwhile, I noticed that the people looked hungry and miserable. Their clothes were old and full of holes. Their houses were badly built and falling down. There were no vegetables or corn growing in the fields. When I visited the School of Mathematics, I could not understand why the students looked so unhappy. "What's the matter, young man?" I asked one of them. "You look quite ill." "Yes, sir," he answered. "You see, we've only just eaten our lessons for today, and it's made us feel rather sick." "Eaten them?" I repeated in surprise. "Why did you do that?" "Oh, that's the way we learn here, sir," he replied. "Our professors write mathematical questions and answers on paper, then we eat the paper. After that, we're only supposed to have bread and water for 3 days, while the information moves upwards to our heads. But it's awful, sir, not eating much for 3 days, and we often feel sick. Excuse me, sir." And he ran past me out of the room. This highly developed system of teaching did not seem to be working well. Chapter 11. Glubbdubdrib and Lugnag. Although the Laputans were kind to me, I did not want to spend a long time in their country. Therefore, I decided to travel from Belnibabi to the island of Lugnag, from there to Japan, and then home to England. But before I went to Lugnag, an official I had met in Legado persuaded me to visit the small island of Glubbdubdrib. "You'll find it a very interesting place," he told me. "Glubbdubdrib means the island of magicians. All the important people there are good at magic, you see. The president is the best magician of them all. But I must warn you, he has some very strange servants. They're all ghosts. By using magic, he can order the ghost of any dead person to be his servant for 24 hours, and the ghost must obey.